to my studio at Visual Philosophy. Today we are going to put hard ground onto our copper etching plate. So after our plate has been beveled, the edges have been angled, and the surface has been polished, cleaned, degreased, and dried, then it's time to put on the ground through which we will do our drawing, and then place it in the acid bath and let the acid etch away the metal where we've exposed it through the ground. So let's go. All right, so we are ready to put our hard ground onto our plate. And this plate has been polished and it's been cleaned, and now it needs to be degreased. And what I would suggest is that even if you've already degreased it, but it's been in like storage in a drawer for a little while, like a couple days, you still want to degrease it right before you put the hard ground on, just to make sure that it's going to stick. So I just spray on the simple green or Windex, paper towel, and just clean the surface, because if it's got that coating on it or anything, it's not going to stick. And the hard ground that I'm using is solvent based. It's a asphaltum tar based liquid, and it's got wax in it too, so that will harden as it dries on the plate and form a thin layer through which we will use a stylus and actually remove parts of the hard ground so that it reveals open areas of the copper plate, just line work. And then we put it in the acid bath, and that acid will eat away at the plate in just those areas where we've removed the hard ground. So it's a protective finish that we put over the plate temporarily while it goes in the acid. And because it's solvent based, we need to use mineral spirits to clean it off of our plate after we're done putting it in the acid. And it's not super toxic. I mean, asphaltum and tar is pretty bad stuff, but if you open up a window, use a fan, and make sure you have a lot of ventilation, then you should be okay. If you're sensitive, you can wear a respirator while you're doing this. But I also use gloves because I don't like getting it on my hands. And I'm going to use a secondary container so that I can pour the hard ground into the container, and then I will brush on the hard ground on my plate using this chip brush. And the reason I like the chip brush is because it's cheap. I can get it in different sizes, so it can go on really wide. You can also use a sponge brush, but I think those tend to soak up a lot more, and so it often puts down a thicker coat. But basically what you want is to put down a pretty thin coat, thin enough that you're not going to see any of the shiny copper through, but thin enough that it's not going to chip off when you start to draw through it. And the sooner you do your drawing with your stylus after applying the wax, after it's dry, then the better it's going to be, the more pliable it's going to be, and the less it's going to tend to chip. So the longer you wait and the harder it becomes on the plate. If you coat it and then put it in a drawer for a couple months, it's going to want to kind of flake off and chip off as you're drawing. So I would just suggest doing it pretty soon after applying. And this stuff dries pretty quickly. If you need to thin it out, I'm just going to pour it in here. If you need it to be thinner, then you can thin it out with the mineral spirits or something like benzene that's a little bit stronger if it's really, really thick and you need it to kind of thin out. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to put Get that cleaned off. We're going to apply the asphaltum, or the hard ground, which is in a liquid form right now, and we're going to just apply it to our plate. And I am brushing it on today. You can certainly pour it on. A lot of people like to pour it on because it gets a very thin, kind of even coat. That kind of wastes it, so I don't like to do that all the time, but if you have a smaller plate, it's nice because you can just put it in like a tray and then just pour it, and it kind of cascades. You know, you lift it up and it kind of just cascades down onto the plate evenly. But I'm going to just brush it on today. That's a little thick, but you'll see that sometimes the brush will leave those brush strokes. And if I were to just leave those and put it in the acid, then wherever I can see that bare copper, that will etch. So the acid will be able to bite into that. So what we want to do is make sure that we only see that bright copper where we want to, where we're going to be drawing our design. And you can see that as I pull it across trying to fix it, it really just leaves more lines. So what I'm going to do instead is let this coat dry, and I'm going to, after it's dry in like 15 minutes, I'm going to reapply with the brush in those parts that have not gotten a lot, that still are a little bit shiny. But even if it's a little bit, you can kind of see if it's a little bit ambery, that's okay. You just don't want it to be shiny, because that means that it's thin, but it's not, if it's shiny, that means that you can see the bare copper, and that's going to etch. And then what I'm going to do after I'm done, when I'm done, I can throw my chip brush away, or I can put it in mineral spirits and wash it off. And then I'm going to pour this remainder back into the hard ground container so that I can reuse it. Then I can either rinse out or wipe out my container with a paper towel, or I can throw it away. Either way is fine. So we'll let that dry, and then we'll come back and touch up any areas that need extra work. So it's pretty much dry. Only took about 15 minutes. And in the parts where there's a little bit of thinness, if you can see the copper through it, then you'll want to reapply a little bit there, trying not to get too thick. But what you don't want is to see the shininess, and that is because that's where the plate is. And so if you have any shiny copper, that's where the acid can actually etch. So what we're trying to do is only remove the hard ground where we want it to be removed. And if we have streaks, we're going to inadvertently get some etching and some lines in our plate that we don't, in our image, that we don't necessarily want. So it doesn't have to be, it can be thin, but what you don't want, like this is kind of a thinner spot. I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of an ambery color, but it's not shiny, so that's okay. As long as it's not shiny, then you can leave it alone. But if there's any kind of shininess, then you really don't want that. And sometimes you can, if that happens, you can burnish the lines out, but it's better to just start with a fresh coat. And then when we're done, this can get thrown away, this brush, and then the remainder can get poured back into our container for next time. And if you do this a lot and you have a container that's dedicated to your hard ground, you can either leave it to dry or you can actually clean it out with alcohol or mineral spirits, just kind of swoosh it around and then put it into a container that's designated for liquid solvents. Like I have one for oil paint. And that's, or you could just toss it, and that's pretty much all there is to it. We let this totally dry and then we'll come back, transfer our image onto it, and then start removing the hard ground.